and welcome back to my channel. Just so you know, I have almost finished my Klux camper van now. On to the very last stages. I've just got to put together the easel, artist's easel, which has a picture that you put on it, and the artist's stool. I've just got to put those together. And also the little tote bag, which you put outside the camper van, is just drying, and also some cushions and a little rug as well. I do hope to show it to you. I might have to sort of show it to you, take the camera into a different room, because it's going to be a bit difficult to move it, so I might just take the camera into a different room and just kind of like do a very quick kind of video recording of it, but it'll be a very quick video recording, just to show you it when it's done. I'll try and do that. Okay, so in today's video, this video is actually a response video. I sometimes watch videos done by Purple Ella. For those who don't know, Purple Ella is a well-known autistic YouTuber. She's been doing videos for a very, very long time, and I do sometimes watch her videos. Sometimes she does quite good content, I find, so I do enjoy watching her videos when she's doing a video that looks interesting. So the response video is really, Purple Ella did a video recently with a friend of hers about self-diagnosis of autism, and Purple Ella was kind of she's on the side of self-diagnosis. She thinks that it's a good thing, and that it doesn't cause any problems, and that it benefits the person who's doing the self-diagnosing, and it doesn't take anything away from other people, she said. So, you know, like, what's the problem sort of thing. And her friend has recently self-diagnosed. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, because I have done videos on this topic before, though I think only briefly, I'm very, very against the idea of self-diagnosis, particularly for a condition as complex as autism. I find, okay, so basically, okay, so I'll probably just put this into context a little bit and just say a bit like what Purple Ella was talking about. So Purple Ella invited her friend onto the program, onto her video, onto her YouTube channel, and her friend has recently self-diagnosed herself with autism. She's got, I think, 2 kids who are who've both been officially diagnosed autistic, or it might just be one kid and one's in the offing. One has been definitively diagnosed and one is waiting an assessment, I think, but I'd have to double check. And her friend is a nurse. She's very able. Doesn't really openly admitted herself, you know, that she's doing very well for herself, and she has been diagnosed with dyslexia, I think, when she was in her early 20s, I think she said, and that at the time she thought that kind of explained all of her difficulties, in the sense that she has of being on the periphery and everything. So she didn't really felt she needed any further condition, if you like, to sort of explain her issues until her child got their autism diagnosis, and then she met Purple Ella, and because they both have kids, autistic kids, and they went for a walk together, and this woman was telling Ella about all of her problems, and Ella was like, you do realise, don't you, that you're autistic? Ella said that she wouldn't say that to just any old person, only people that she knows very well, where she feels that she can say such a thing. But and then this other person kind of thought, oh yes, maybe you're right, sort of thing, and sort of pieced it all together. And she said that that's enough for her. She doesn't need to go for an official assessment, because she feels that just knowing in herself is enough. That it kind of clarifies a lot of things for her, you know, that, and yeah, sort of thing. But she doesn't feel the need to go and get an official assessment. And she says if she did go to get an official assessment, she doesn't think she would actually get the diagnosis anyway, because she masks so well, and also because she's very successful, and therefore she's basically not clinically impaired. And obviously, in order to get an actual diagnosis, you need to be sort of clinically impaired, sort of thing. I don't think she used the word clinical impairment herself, but that was kind of like a gist of what she was saying, basically, that she's not impaired enough, she's too successful, and ultimately she wouldn't actually, the likelihood is she wouldn't get that diagnosis, and Purple Ella agreed with her, so for her, she's just happy to sort of self-diagnose herself, sort of thing, and she feels that it's good for her sort of self-understanding. Okay, so Ella was siding with that idea. Now, as you know, I'm very, very against the idea of self-diagnosis. Now, the reason for that is that while, of course, someone who self-diagnoses doesn't take services away from someone who does have a diagnosis, for a quite simple reason is that you need a diagnosis to get services. At least most services, require an actual diagnosis, a formal diagnosis from a clinician, usually an NHS clinician. Actually, they're quite fussy about that. Sometimes people who've had private diagnoses often have to get it sort of reconfirmed, if you like, through the NHS if they want to get services and so on. I actually think that's good, because there needs to be a level playing field, and otherwise people could jump the queue, and that wouldn't be fair. So of course it doesn't take anything away from people on that scale. Ella is quite right. But I feel what it does do is that it actually trivializes the concept of autism. It waters it down, and it sends the wrong message out to society. I do find that it's quite self-entitled to self-diagnose yourself with something as complex as autism. It's not like, say, simply saying that you think you might have depression. I guess some people might self-diagnose with depression. Again, that has its kind of philosophical kind of questions there, but I wouldn't say, but that doesn't kind of irritate me in the same way. I sort of feel, because I think it's because autism is such a complex diagnosis, essentially affects the person's whole neuronal functioning, it's pervasive, and it's therefore you need to get, you should really for any condition, but particularly for autism, you need to go and get properly assessed. This is a very complex assessment. It's far more complex to say diagnosis, say something like depression and so on. This requires a full, in-depth developmental history going right back to the person's baby days, even right back to before the person can even remember, which is why it's important to have your parents there. Obviously, for people whose parents are deceased, that can pose challenges, and I guess clinicians then maybe should be flexible and look at other sources of information, because obviously it wouldn't be fair just because someone's parents have died, and particularly if that person has is really clearly autistic and they've got lots of evidence that points to that, then obviously a clinician has to look at all sources of evidence. But ideally, if the parents are available, then they should certainly contribute to the diagnosis, because autism is a developmental condition. The parents will know what the person was like, right from babyhood. They're the early signs that obviously the person themselves might not remember. So it's really complex, and the reasoning for that is that obviously autism begins in babyhood or very early childhood at the latest, and there are many other conditions that might kind of mimic autism but aren't autism, because they didn't begin in babyhood, early childhood. Autism is childhood onset, whereas there are other conditions that can mimic autism that can develop later. But there are also conditions that can share traits with autism. I know that dyslexia, for example, can actually share some traits with autism, although obviously autism is significantly more serious than dyslexia. Obviously someone can be very severely dyslexic and that can impact their life and cause them great disability, but obviously autism is far more complex than dyslexia and far more pervasive. But someone with dyslexia, for example, can share some of the traits of autism without necessarily being autistic. And that's the case for other neurodevelopmental conditions as well, where there can be some overlap, but the person doesn't necessarily have that other condition. There might just be sort of like some trait overlap, if you like, which again is why it's so important for people to see a clinician who can disentangle the diagnoses. So I thoroughly disagree with self-diagnosis of autism. And I also find, as I say, I find it trivialises autism, because autism is a very serious condition. And it is usually extremely able people who aren't actually impaired who feel entitled to self-diagnose, because obviously if you are impaired, like properly impaired, the only reason you'd actually want to get a diagnosis of something like autism is so you can access state support. That's basically why I got assessed. If I didn't need state support, like if I didn't need support worker input, if I didn't need financial assistance because I can't work and so on, I probably wouldn't have gone and got an assessment, because ultimately I needed the assessment for me to basically access those things. In order to get specialist autism support and so on, support worker input, you need a diagnosis, quite rightly so, because obviously anyone could, claim to be autistic. So people who self-diagnose really are very privileged anyway, because they don't actually need support, because if they did really need support, they would go and push for an actual assessment. Now, obviously getting an assessment is difficult, and I'm talking, by the way, about UK. I understand that in America it's very, very difficult, and I don't want to get into a whole debate about what it's like in America. I disagree with self-diagnosis, and regardless of what nationality you're from and whether or not you have access to a national health service or not, I disagree with self-diagnosis, but obviously it is more complicated in America, and I do feel sorry for American people who basically can't get a diagnosis without paying a fortune. But I'm talking here about UK, okay? We have an NHS. So basically you can get a free assessment. It's not ideal. Sometimes you have to wait a very, very long time. But you can get a free assessment, okay? If you're prepared to wait, you can get a free assessment on the NHS in the UK. That's not an issue. So people who need support, who are like actually disabled and impaired and need support for diagnosis, will push to get one on the NHS. They might have to wait some time, but they will do it because they need the support ultimately. Someone who doesn't need support at all might feel entitled, self-entitled, and if you ask me, it's quite arrogant as well, because they're basically saying they know more than a doctor, to basically self-diagnose. And they're not actually that impaired, because otherwise they would need an assessment. There would be no ifs nor buts. They would need an assessment. They would have to go and get one. So like I'm saying, they're basically very, 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 very able. They're a creme de la creme, if you like. Now, this poses problems with autism as a concept, because autism, by definition, at least as it is currently defined, and as it should be in my opinion, is only diagnosed if a person has what's called a clinically significant impairment, which basically means just having traits of autism is not enough, because any perfectly normal person can have traits of autism. I know for a fact. My brother, he's not autistic, he's completely functional, capable, he doesn't have any disability, but he does have some traits. I guess because we're siblings, we're obviously going to have shared genes. He's a bit socially awkward. When he was younger, he got rather obsessed with things and so on. I can see traits in him, definitely. I can see genetic shadowing. And, he could claim to be autistic if he wanted to. He could self-diagnose, because he does share some traits, He's a bit socially awkward. He admits himself, he can find it a bit difficult being around people. He's a bit socially anxious at times. But he's not disabled at all. He's very functional and capable. And he's not autistic, but he has traits, as do many people. So that's why it's very important that for this to be in the diagnostic criteria, it has to be a clinically significant impairment. Otherwise my dad could claim to be autistic. He's got traits, but he's not clinically significantly impaired at all. He's perfectly functional. He doesn't have any disability. Okay, so I'm going to move over to video number 2, because I do have quite a lot to say about this. So moving over to video number 2.